Hi, my name is Robert Pickering, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about how the various U.S. Grand Lodges are using Twitter. So the question that I set out to answer was, how are the different U.S. Freemasonic Grand Lodges using Twitter to communicate with each other and also to communicate with their subordinate lodges? So the method that I used to gather information was I created a Twitter network that had all of the U.S. Grand Lodges and all of their subordinate lodges. Basically, I started by just searching on Twitter for all of the Grand Lodges, and I would follow them, and then I would go through all of their follower and following lists and add any other Grand Lodges that I could find. And I went through all of those, and I found all of the different lodges that were either being followed or were following a Grand Lodge. And then I grabbed those with Tweakall and I put those into Gephi. I also sent out a survey to all the different Grand Lodges through, with the help of the Grand Secretary for the Grand Lodge of Virginia. And I asked 5 different questions. Does the Grand Lodge have a strategy for using social media? And is Twitter part of the strategy? Is there a use policy that the Grand Lodge has for the various subordinate lodges? And is the Grand Lodge using Twitter to communicate with? And there's a series of categories. And then I also asked what the age of the target audience was for using Twitter. So the results of the survey were kind of interesting. 74% said that they did have a strategy, but 70% said that Twitter was not part of the strategy. And that was interesting because 80% of Fortune 500 companies in 2013 are actively using Twitter as part of their strategy to reach people, customers, other constituents. So it was actually kind of interesting that 70% of the Grand Lodges said Twitter was not part of their strategy. And 61% said that they had a policy governing the use of social media by subordinate lodges. That's interesting because there were several instances of policies that were rather restrictive that indicated that members and subordinate lodges should not contact other Grand Lodges electronically. So there's a little bit of a restriction placed on members on how they can communicate with other Grand Lodges. And then how Grand Lodges are using Twitter to communicate, the response was that none of them are using Twitter to communicate with each other, and only 14% are using Twitter to communicate with subordinate lodges. Most of the response was other, and in that other there was a lot of using it to respond to the public or addressing the public in general. You can probably include members and prospective members in that as well. So in the age category, 100% of the responses were that they were targeting the millennial generation. So going on to the network, this is what the network looked like once I pulled all the data into Gephi and visualized it. And the problem with that is, so all of those nodes are colored by state Grand Lodge. Those are all the lodges and all the Grand Lodges, and each node represents either a lodge or a Grand Lodge, and it's colored by state. And what Tweakall does is that it assigns an edge weight based on the number of tweets that a node has sent since its inception. And that doesn't give any real indication of relationships between the different nodes. So this is the same network, identical data. And what I did is I reassigned the edge weights so that all lodges that belong to a particular Grand Lodge all have an edge weight of 1 if they're following each other or following their own state Grand Lodge. They have an edge weight of 0.4 if they're following another Grand Lodge, which was either the mother of their Grand Lodge or a daughter of their Grand Lodge. So if there's a mother-daughter relationship between a Grand Lodge and another Grand Lodge and their subordinate lodges, then there's a higher edge weight. And then for all others, the edge weight is 0.4. So what ended up happening here is it pretty much grouped lodges and Grand Lodges together by state, that was the intent. But there's some areas where you can see that they're complete satellites. For instance, over here on the left, you have 2 lodges that are from California. California is over here on the lower right. And these two lodges are following Massachusetts in red. This large node here is the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And so this was actually interesting because there was a tweet sent out by the Grand Lodge of California talking about how millennials were joining Freemasonry and revitalizing it. And then the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts turned around and retweeted that. And then that article was then also again retweeted by another lodge over here in Iowa. So what you have here is a lot of cross communication going on. And these two lodges over here that are from California actually didn't get the information originally from California, but would have gotten it through their connection with the Grand Lodge of Massachusetts. And there's no direct mother-daughter relationship between Massachusetts and California. There is one between Massachusetts and Connecticut. This is Connecticut here, and Connecticut and California, but there's no direct connection in between. So this is the network. This is the same network with all of the subordinate lodges removed, and you can see how the different Grand Lodges are communicating with each other. You can see there's some areas where there's no connection at all, and then there's a lot of connection to the middle, but then you also don't notice that there's quite a bit of disconnect from the center nodes. The network has 26 Grand Lodges, 29 edges, and has a graph density of 0.445. So it's a fairly dense graph. So this is the egocentric network of Wisconsin. You can see that there's several nodes that it's not connected to at all, even though it appears in the center of the graph. And then you have, on the other extreme, you've got Massachusetts, which is connected to almost everybody, and is followed by 17, which is more than half of the other Grand Lodges. So the survey indicated that Grand Lodges are not using Twitter to communicate with each other, but the network and the tweets themselves indicate otherwise. And the other thing to take away from the study is that increased network density really does increase message efficiency. And basically, if Grand Lodges want to increase their effectiveness in communicating their message, then they need to embrace this technology and start using it to communicate with each other. Thank you very much.